Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 59. The first book today is Made in America, The Informal History of the English Language in the United States, by Bill Bryson, published in 1994. This book was lent to me by my friend Bob Kinsey, who, over the years, he would talk about Bill Bryson a lot, and I got the impression that he was a personal friend, and I figured out that he was not. They were not personal friends. This is a really interesting book. It's about Bill Bryson is a linguist. He studies the origin of words, and so this book is all about the origin of American English words. And there are a lot of good stories, a lot of interesting, a lot of good history, and a lot of good, very entertaining stories. A couple that I remember is the word the boondocks. When I was growing up, we used to go camping at a place we called the boondocks. And boondocks is a word that means like a remote area, like a remote wooded area. And it actually comes from the Philippines. When the U.S. went to the Philippines in 1898 and occupied that country, the Filipino word or Tagalog word for mountain is bundok. And so when Americans were, communicating with Filipinos somehow, and of course, mountains tend to be in remote areas, right? You don't have cities by mountains usually, and so they would be. And the Filipino guy must have said, they asked, said something. Oh, that's the boondok, and the guy was, it was a misunderstanding. He thought it meant like a remote area, and anyway, it became. So that's where that word comes from. Another word that I'm aware of is that the word okay, the most popular word in English. Okay, letters O and K, and supposedly it comes from Martin Van Buren, and he was the 8th president of the United States. He was from Kinderhook, New Jersey, and I believe, yeah, and they used to call it his nickname was Old Kinderhook. And during a campaign, they were praising him. They're talking about Old Kinderhook. Said he's okay, good guy. So anyway, this book is very detailed, has a tremendous amount of information. It's very entertaining and informative, very interesting. He did a lot of work. The next book is A Time of Angels by Karen Hess, 1995. This is a children's book set in Boston during the First World War. And there's a deadly flu epidemic. The character in the book is a girl who gets separated from her family, but she survives. So, yeah, in the old days, they'd have these horrific epidemics of different things, yellow fever, typhoid fever, and so forth, where large numbers of people would die, and then there would be panic, and people would be trying to get away from the places, yellow fever, and trying to get away from these places, like, for example, cities maybe, and it could be very, very traumatic. A lot of it was mosquito-borne, but they didn't know that. And so, very, very good, wonderful, historical children's book. Karen Hessel, she's an amazing writer. The next book is None Dare Call It Treason by John A. Stormer. And I don't have the year it was published. This is an amazing book. It's about, the book chronicles the growth of pro-communist attitudes in the United States. And, it really, I think, it goes back to, well, there's always been the difference between the rich and the poor, and the Industrial Revolution is really when modern wealth was created. There's vast wealth through factories and so forth. And then you had individuals become extremely wealthy. The factory workers, not doing so well, not making much money, and very tough work, living in cities, maybe having a tough time surviving, So, and then these owners of businesses could be extremely wealthy. So actually the gap between the rich and poor has really skyrocketed. And then you had, the French Revolution really was, an activity or an event in which the poor got revenge against the rich. And so there's always a resentment that poor people feel against rich people. That, like, wow, how come those people are living in mansions, and you have this in third world countries today. So then the Russian Revolution really is the thing that affected the world because it was this ideology that that the government was going to eliminate rich and poor, that everyone would be the same, everyone would have a good life, supposedly. And I think Americans were definitely affected by this in the 1930s during the Great Depression, when you had high unemployment and people really struggling, even starving. And then the Russians were trying to promote what they were doing as if it was wonderful and this tremendous thing. And they would have people come to see, they had visitors, and of course you didn't see everything, and they were trying to promote this, that they had achieved something incredible, like a brotherhood of man. So a lot of people thought, wow, this is really good. We should do this here. We should have a communist government in the United States. And then same thing happened in China. Back in the 1970s, you had Americans going to China and thinking that they had achieved something great or wonderful. When in reality, in my opinion, in the Soviet Union, there was horrific suffering. The people really lost all freedom, and religion was banned. And so I'm a strong anti-communist. But also, years ago, I was very sympathetic to the communist movement. I was practically a communist myself because, it's very appealing. It appeals to idealistic people. It appeals to good people. I have friends today, I think, who are still in favor of this. And especially if you feel bad about poor people, the suffering of the poor, the communism can be very, very attractive. So this is why this is why I think there has been this pro-communist attitudes that grew in the United States. In fact, I think it played a role in China. When the Chinese Civil War, when Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek were going at it, and Mao could have been eliminated, but the U.S. put pressure on Chiang Kai-shek, our ally, to not do so. And then eventually Mao, defeated Chiang Kai-shek and took power. This is a fascinating topic, very, very interesting. The next book is The Lincoln Reader, edited by Paul M. Engel, 1947. Well, this book has a number of individuals who wrote about their memories of Abraham Lincoln, or biographers. And some of them include William Herndon, who was his law partner, Salmon P. Chase, who was a politician. I think he may have been in Lincoln's cabinet. Carl Sandburg, who wrote a very popular biography of Lincoln, Gideon Wells, and so forth. So it's all about this incredible man in American history and world history, really, who prosecuted the Civil War from the North, from the Union, and was able to keep the United States one country, keep the United States from fragmenting into two countries. Also, he was able to end slavery in the United States. So really, and he really suffered a lot, and it was very tough. He had a tough time because of all the death and all the suffering the Civil War entailed, and he felt bad about it. He was a good guy. He was not didn't want people to die or suffer. He was a good fellow, but he did what he believed was right. He didn't. Some people could have said, or some presidents could have said, like his predecessor, James Buchanan, okay, fine, let the South go, let them go away. A lot of folks in the North thought, well, look at all this suffering. This is horrific. The price is too high to keep the Union, to keep our country one. But Lincoln said no, and I think he did the right thing. I believe he did the right thing. Because if we had broken into two countries, we could have broken into three or four or more and become weak like Central America, and we could have had ongoing war amongst ourselves, among the different states. So I believe strongly that Abraham Lincoln was a tremendous man in American history and world history. The next book is Highwire, The Education of Bill Clinton by John Brummett, 1984. Well, this came out during Bill Clinton's first term as U.S. president. He was elected in 1992, so and took office in 93. So this is only a year into his 8 years in power. The author describes Bill Clinton's positive side, his charisma, intelligence, and work ethic, hard worker, but also things that are problematic about him, his dishonesty and sexual problems, his womanizing. And the conclusion that the author comes to is that Bill Clinton, he was very hopeful about Bill Clinton. So certainly Bill Clinton's a fascinating topic, because he had these, he had these tremendous qualities, very, very smart. If you listen to his speeches, the guy was knowledgeable, and he could talk, He's very endearing, and he had this kindness to him, sense of humor, and but there was a dark side as well, especially the way he treated women and the way he had all these affairs with women, and also reports of dishonesty. So very interesting topic. Bill Clinton. The next book is A World History by William H. McNeill, 1979. Now, this is a world history book, and when I read it in 2013, I thought, I should have read it a long time ago to be a better history teacher, since that's been my career. The author talks about Chandragupta Maurya from India. I remember in high school our history teacher talking about him, Vernon Gillespie. The Tokugawa in Japan, and Cambodia and Java, the great Hindu kingdoms in Cambodia and Java. Fascinating book, world history, the ancient Greeks, actually going back to, ancient China, ancient India, the empires in America, the Incas in the South America, the Aztecs in Mexico, and in Europe, these different empires, the ancient Greeks and Romans, and then the Persia and the Hittites before them, the Roman Empire, the Middle Ages, and European conquest of the world, and so forth. And so it's real interesting. Really, so much to learn in world history. It's a fascinating topic. An unending topic where you're always going to be learning more. The next book is A Short History of the Middle East by George E. Kirk, 1948. It's a fairly old book. When we moved into our home in Rocky River when I was 13 in 1973, on Avalon Drive, this was a book that was left in the library, which stayed there. And it's inscribed Gertrude Tilke, 1954, the previous owners of our home. And I ended up reading it many, many years later. So it's about the early part I really enjoyed about Muhammad, his life, and early Islam, the spread of Islam, which is very, very interesting. The latter part is all about actually the current events in 1948, things that were happening. So it was a little bit dull because a lot of details of politicians in the Middle East. Obviously Israel was a major thing, and then these countries, the new countries that had been carved from the Ottoman Empire, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and then Egypt, and so forth. So it's a real fascinating topic, ongoing, because of the oil in the Middle East, which is so important for the world, for gasoline for automobiles, and then the issue with Israel and the conflict between Israel and the Muslim world, and now with the Islamic Jihad, conflict between Muslims and or radical Muslims and the West, or the rest of the world. Fascinating topic, very interesting. The next book is Fordlandia by Eduardo Siglia, translated by Patricia J. Duncan, 1997. This is an amazing story. Of course, Henry Ford was the tremendous automobile manufacturer, and we still have the Ford Motor Company today. And he really revolutionized, created a revolution, and because he started the assembly line, and he actually started paying his workers more so they could buy his cars, so he'd have money to buy his cars. And one of the things that Ford needed was rubber for tires. Automobiles have to have 4 tires to operate. And so they needed, and rubber, well, there's synthetic rubber, but in the old days, rubber came from trees, rubber trees. It was like a sap that you would tap. It would flow, put these pipes, and the sap would flow into maybe a bucket, and it would be gathered and then processed and turned into commercial rubber. So Ford learned that there were rubber trees growing in the Amazon River Valley in South America. So he thought, he decided to start a rubber tree farm in Brazil. He bought 3 million acres of land in the Amazon in Brazil to grow rubber trees for tires. The thing, it didn't work out. Great, wonderful, amazing story. The thing is, rubber trees in the wild, apparently they grow at a certain distance from each other. Now, what he did, he started these farms, or a huge farm. And he had, the trees growing relatively close together because, he's trying to maximize the use of the land. And what he found, the problem is that there was a fungus which was attacking the trees and would spread from tree to tree, and the way they were planted densely. And in the wild, that if a tree, a rubber tree, contracted that fungus, it wouldn't be a problem. It would just it would kill one tree. It couldn't spread because the trees were spread apart further. And that's why in nature you have all this intelligence in nature. There are also locusts that were killing the trees. So it became a disaster. It's what Henry Ford tried to do. And it didn't work out. He spent a lot of money, and he had problems with the climate. Sending American workers down there, and cultural problems with the Brazilians. And very fascinating book, wonderful history. Really enjoyed it. The next book is Revolting Revolutionaries: America's Funny but True History, 1750s to 1790s, by Elizabeth Levy, 2003. Well, this is a children's book. You can say that the title is a little bit disagreeable if you're conservative. The author talks about George Washington, Sam Adams, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, the American War of Independence, and she's getting into, you could say, the warts, or maybe some of the funny things, the foibles of these fellows who played this major role in American history, and so trying to make it appealing for children. That they're revolting, trying to get kids' attention, because so many young people, they're bored in school, and so many adults hate history because they think, it was so boring. Maybe they had a very boring history teacher. So it is good to try to make the effort to make history interesting, so more people become interested, because I think it's a fascinating topic. The next book is Bully for You, Teddy Roosevelt, by Gene Fritz, 1991. This is another children's book. It's about Theodore Roosevelt, who was president, I think, from 1901 to 1909. Yeah, and he was a fascinating fellow. He loved nature. He promoted America as a global power. He was able to get the Panama Canal. It wasn't finished during his time in office, but he was the guy who really pushed it forward. This humongous, overwhelming project, so that boats could travel between the Pacific Ocean and Atlantic Ocean and vice versa. Incredible job. And, he was a very energetic guy and really pushed his agenda. And this was a very good thing that he did for the world. He also was involved in the war against Spain, and which led to Cuba, Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam becoming American territory rather than Spanish. It was really the end of the Spanish Empire. He also promoted national parks, big into the outdoors. My father's mother, Gertrude Zook Ray, saw him in Marion, Ohio in 1912 when she was 14 at the train station. She was pretty excited about that. That memory was a very fond memory for her. I know Glenn Beck is very much against Theodore Roosevelt, and Glenn Beck is my political idol. So, and he believes that for conservatives, many conservatives believe the U.S. government has become way too strong and powerful and overwhelming, and Glenn Beck traces it back to Theodore Roosevelt's presidency. And so that's why he's against Theodore Roosevelt. But Theodore Roosevelt was really an amazing guy. He's very energetic. He was, you could say, the first celebrity president. He was extremely popular and really he had so much energy. Very interesting guy. The next book is An Unquiet Mind by K. Redfield Jameson, 1995. This is an amazing book, really something. It's about, it was given to me by my sister Patricia many years ago, and I read it once and I read it again. It's a book about manic depressive illness. Individuals who have these extreme moods, manias when you're very, very energetic and intelligent and so forth, and then depression, which is the low mood, where you have very low energy, low intelligence, and really and negative thinking. So I when I read this, it was very touching, and I thought to myself, well, it's possible that I've had this, and because I've had these two extremes. I've definitely had depression, and I've had. It's been an ongoing problem over the years, and I've also had these periods of high energy, and creativity and intelligence. So, yeah, maybe I've had it. The thing what I believe about mental illness see, I believe in the law of karma, and everything that we do comes back to us, good or bad. And that mental illness is bad karma, that people do misbehave. We've all misbehaved. And, and even our thoughts, if we think negative thoughts about other people, thoughts have power, and that's bad karma. If we are cruel to other people, we eventually will become depressed. People who become alcoholics. So I believe mental illness starts with misbehavior. And if you want to cure mental illness, I don't believe, medication can play a role, but I think ultimately people need to behave. We have to be good people. We have to be honest and work, and we have to care about other people and be respectful of other people. And if we really work to have good character, if we're depressed, then eventually good times will come to us. Happiness will come. And I think also that if we make an effort, and to be good people, we need to contact God through God contact. Since God is a source of goodness, God contact is the best way to improve our character. And if we are good people, mental illness will disappear. We will become mentally healthy rather than mentally ill. So it's a fascinating topic, very, very interesting. And this is a really, really good book about manic depression. Fascinating. The next book is A Journey to the New World, The Diary of Remember Patience Whipple by Catherine Lasky, 1996. This is, I believe, is also a children's book. It's the voyage. It depicts the voyage of the Pilgrims on the ship the Mayflower in 1620. American history, Plymouth, Massachusetts, hardships and triumphs. Now we know that the first English settlers in America were in Virginia in 1607. John Smith and others. And then shortly after that, they had these settlers in Massachusetts. So those were the first two states. And eventually, those two states played the major role in the American Revolution. And so this was, it was pretty cold up there, and still is up there in the Boston area in Massachusetts. And they had a tough time surviving in the New World and trying to figure out how they could get along, how they could survive. And a lot of them died because of lack of food, there were issues with Indians. Of course, this is where the first Thanksgiving took place with American Indians, and there was early on there was friendship with Indians. Really wonderful history book for children or anyone really. The next book is Honor in the Dust by Greg Jones, 2012. Well, I purchased this at the Manila airport when I flew. When I left the Philippines, coming on 5 years ago, in August of 2013. So I bought it in the Philippines. It's about the Spanish-American War and what was called also the Phil-Am War, the war between the Philippines and the United States. Cuba, and the book is about Cuba and the Philippines. The time period is 1898 to 1904. William McKinley was the U.S. president who decided to prosecute war with Spain, and as a result, the United States acquired Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. Although Cuba had nominal independence, and Philippines, became independent later. Guam and Puerto Rico are still American territories, and it goes back to this time period, 1898. Theodore Roosevelt played a role. Of course, he was in Cuba himself as a soldier fighting the Spanish. And the parts that interested me were in the Philippines, Samar, and there was resistance again among Filipinos. In fact, the Spanish actually very quickly surrendered to the U.S. in the Philippines, but then there was a pretty tough war between the U.S. and Filipinos that dragged on for a number of years, and a lot of Filipinos died. And so this book really is saying, as the title suggests, Honor in the Dust. He's saying that this was wrong, that the United States coming to the Philippines was wrong. Look at how terrible this was, and all the Filipinos who died in Samar. And I think, we should tell the whole story, which is true. It was sad, the Filipinos who died, and there were atrocities committed. But I believe, in my opinion, that the U.S. coming to the Philippines was a good thing for the Philippines and for the United States, because it was the beginning of a friendship between Filipinos and Americans. And I believe both countries and both peoples have benefited. So I disagree with the attitude of this book, because the U.S., the Filipinos had not been prepared for independence. The Spanish didn't know anything themselves about democracy. And to govern yourself, you have to have a democracy. And so they were really, they had really been mistreated for centuries, And so the U.S. period in the Philippines brought an infrastructure, roads, public schools for Filipinos. Filipinos became English speakers, and now Filipinos, work all over the world because they speak English, and therefore they can work using the international language, and they can work anywhere in the world. And so the America's taught Filipinos about democracy, and there have been challenges in the Philippines since independence in 1946 because of cultural reasons, because of what I call the dictator culture, because democracy involves respect, and if you have a dictator culture, then there is a lack of respect between leaders and followers. But anyway, at least it's the beginning of working toward a good government, because you need to have a government. The question is, how does it work? I think the United States did a lot of good in the Philippines in helping, and also in medicine, building hospitals, roads, and so forth. And Filipinos became basketball players. That became their national sport. And then on the other side, I think a lot of Filipinos now have come to the U.S. I don't know how many million, more than 1 or 2 million, more than that. And they have this wonderful spirit. Filipinos are patient. They smile. They work hard. They're good people. They're spiritual people. They endure. They can accept hardships. They have all these wonderful qualities. Yeah, there are problems in Philippine culture, but basically, I believe they have a very positive effect. Those who come to the U.S. on the United States, because they're wonderful people. I was in the Philippines for 20 years, and I know it had a very positive effect on me. So I disagree with the author Greg Jones, his attitude that it was a terrible thing that the United States came to the Philippines. I think it was there was suffering, and Filipinos were very disappointed that they did not get their independence at that time. But I think they weren't ready, and that I think the American period in Philippine history was positive for the Philippines. I believe both countries have been helped by the relationship that was established by the United States coming to the Philippines in 1898. It's all very debatable, but I think that's my opinion. The next book is Dealing, the Cleveland Indians' New Ball Game by Terry Pluto, Inside the Front Office and the Process of Rebuilding a Contender, 2006. Now, this is a baseball book about the Cleveland Indians, and they had a tremendous era from 1994 to 2001, around that time, where every year they were really strong. They were really a good team, and they did so well. They got to the World Series twice, lost both times, but the other years they got to the playoffs in 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000. So like 6 straight years they got the playoffs, and then things were changing. The players got older, and then Cleveland had a tough time competing in terms of revenue because didn't have as much income from cable television. So then they had this traumatic experience for fans when they had to get rid of all the star players because they couldn't sign them. And so they lost these guys like Manny Ramirez and Jim Thome, who left. And then they had to completely rebuild. And the fans were so angry. And the owners, actually, the Jacobs brothers, sold at the right time. They knew that. I guess they were pretty smart guys. And the new owner was Larry Dolan. Everyone hated Larry Dolan and blamed him because all of a sudden the Indians were lousy, But according to this book, Terry Pluto says no. Dolan did the right thing, and then he's the owner. Mark Shapiro was the GM, he took a lot of criticism. Now, the only thing I disagree with Terry Pluto is the manager, Eric Wedge, who I didn't really like. I thought he was he's a very strong spirit. I thought he was too hard on the guys. The thing is, they got to the 2007 ALCS, American League Championship Series, so the rebuilding worked. Although they didn't, they were up 3-1. That was pretty tough. And then they lost 3 straight to Boston, and Boston went on to win the World Series. So anyway, this is a very interesting baseball book that I really enjoyed. Terry Pluto is this incredible author of mostly Cleveland sports books, but other sports as well. It appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And God bless you. I hope you find a good book to read. And I'll see you next time.